Hi everyone! Today we are going to be sewing a really fun beginner quilt that I think that even seasoned quilters will love to make. Why do I think that? Because this quilt comes together not only really quickly, but after you get the first two blocks ready to go, you can really make so many different quilt patterns and layouts. Now, this is a great quilt for those of you who are beginning with quilting because these blocks are really easy to make. And once you get them going, I think you'll really see how many different possibilities there are out there using this layout. Because this looks like a flying geese block, which is a little bit complicated to make, but I call it a faux flying geese block because it's two half square triangles sewn together to get that flying geese look. And doing it this way makes it a lot easier. Plus, if you decide to use a charm pack, it makes this quilt come together even more quickly. If you don't know what a charm pack is, stay tuned because I am going to go over all of the supplies for this quilt next. So, like I said, the possibilities are endless with this quilt, but here is the quilt I made. So this is one of the layouts that I'll show you, along with 3 more layouts that I kind of played around with while I was deciding what I wanted to do with these blocks. So let's dive into the supplies and I'll talk a little bit more about how you get these blocks and the sizes and all of that. So let's get sewing. Okay, so for this project, you are going to need 58 5-inch printed squares, 58 background squares, so white, cream, any low volume fabric you might have on hand or like using. So I cut up about 2 1/4 yards of background fabric. So I have kind of this blossom fabric. You can see it has a tone on tone kind of design on it. And then I have another fabric here. So I'm using 2 different fabrics. Don't be afraid to do that. It can add a lot of interest and fun to a quilt. And then I also have 37 background blocks. They're rectangles that are 4 inches by 7.5 inches. And again, I'm using the 2 different fabrics in that. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the other items you may see here that will come in handy for you. First, I have a diagonal seam tape. This helps me sew half square triangles using the method I'm going to show here so much easier. I also have the Tucker trimmer one, which I like to use for squaring up my half square triangles to make them nice and even. I absolutely love this trim tool. I also have a design board here that I've made. The reason I like using these is that it helps me piece rows together really well, but it also is a nice way to carry blocks from my cutting area to the sewing machine to iron, and they don't fly off because of the fleece on here. So I do have a video that shows how to make these that I will link as well. And then for sewing blocks together, I really like these fork pins. They have 2 points on them that you can see, and this really helps when you're pinning seams together that are meeting up. When you pin them, it helps hold them in place when you're sewing blocks together to help you get those really nice points, and that comes in really handy when you're doing blocks that have half square triangles in them, or really even when you're doing a patchwork quilt. All right. And then you can see that I have a charm pack here, and I love charm packs, and this is actually the same charm pack. And I love them because 1, they are pre-cut. 2, oftentimes the edges are pinked on them, so they don't kind of unravel as much as other fabric can. You see how they kind of have that zigzag teeth look along the edge. So you don't get all those strings kind of hanging off that get in your way and just don't look really nice. But they're also really nicely color coordinated. And you can see here you have this print and the same print but in different colors. It really helps you ensure if you're not comfortable picking out colors or prints and know what goes together. These charm packs are all coordinated so nicely, you don't even have to worry about introducing a bunch of different colors and prints into your project. They all come nicely together. Now, I do want to point out, however, that a charm pack has 42 pieces in it. And if you recall, I said we would need 58 for this project. So since there are going to be a lot more because I need 2 charm packs to make this project, I am going to show you, if you're choosing to use a charm pack, how to use the rest of those, the ones that you didn't use for the main part of the quilt, to piece a fun scrappy border. If you do choose to put the border on your quilt and get 2 charm packs, I would suggest cutting some 1.5 inch by width of fabric strips to first put around the border to kind of separate the inner part of the quilt from the pieced border. It'll just help it look a little more unified. Let me show you how to use the diagonal seam tape first. Then I'll show you another way to do these half square triangles if the diagonal seam tape does not work for you. All right, so I'm going to take a printed fabric and one of my background squares. They're both 5.5 inches, and I'm going to put them right sides together. Now, if you're using a solid background, either side of the fabric can really be the right side. But you can see my fabric has a little bit of a design on it. So I'm going to make sure that side is always facing my pretty printed side. I'm going to line it up really well, and I'm going to head to the sewing machine. So with this method for doing half square triangles, we're going to be getting 2 half square triangles from each set that we're sewing together like this. And what we're going to be doing is kind of sewing along the diagonal, so from corner to corner, but we're going to be doing that twice. And with the diagonal seam tape, what you're going to do is line up that middle red line coming straight out from where the needle is, okay? And that middle line is going to be where we're sewing. Now, because we're going to be sewing along the center diagonal twice, we're going to be sewing 1/4 inch away from that center diagonal. So you want to line up your presser foot with the point of your fabric up here, so the side of it. And this is if you're using a 1/4 inch foot. And I didn't bring the tape down quite enough, but what you want is this bottom diagonal point to be lined up with the black line that the side of your foot is lined up with. So then we're going to sew and what you want to do is watch where that point is and make sure it stays lined up with that black line. Okay, so to this end, we're going to cut the thread, turn it, and do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to line up the side of my foot right with the point. Now, like I said, that really works best if you have a 1/4 inch foot. And then I'm going to make sure the bottom of my diagonal point is lined up with the black line again. All right, and so that is how you use the diagonal seam tape. Now, I am going to show you another method for getting these 2 lines that are 1/4 inch away from the center line to see if that works better for you. All right, so if you don't want to use the diagonal seam tape in this project, you can get either a friction erasable pen, or you could use just a standard pencil because it is going to be cut away later anyway. On the back side of your background square, you would want to mark corner to corner on the diagonal with either your pencil or your heat resistant or your heat erasable pen, whatever you choose to use. You're going to want to mark corner to corner on the back of all 58 of your background squares. So then you're going to put these, the one you marked and one of your printed 5-inch squares, right sides together. Then you're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch away on each side of that marked line. Just like before, I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch away from that diagonal line. This time that is drawn. But if you would like to make this step go a little bit faster, you can get all of your squares marked and then chain piece all of them along one side and then cut all the chain piece and sew along the other side. All right, so this is how it looks if you've sewn a 1/4 inch away from the marked line, and here is how it looks if you use the diagonal seam tape. So it's very, very, very similar. I just feel like the diagonal seam tape makes this go a lot faster because you don't have to mark that line on all of them. However, if the diagonal seam tape doesn't work well for you, if you've tried it and you can't get a nice straight line, then definitely just take the time and mark corner to corner. No way's right or wrong. It's just what works best for you. So you're going to want to get 58 of these sewn up just like this. So once you get them all sewn, you're going to want to cut right along the diagonal of all of them. Then you'll want to press all of your seams to the printed side. So I'm going to finger press them now, and then I will add some heat from the iron to make sure these seams are all set. So see how nice those pinked edges are? See, my fabric's already kind of unraveling on this one. The pinked edges just keep that from happening. It makes these stay so nice. All right, I'm going to add some heat to these. All right, so when you have all these half square triangles ready, it's time to trim them up to a 4-inch half square triangle. Now, if you're using the Tucker trimmer like I am, you have this circle side here that represents when you're cutting whole numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Or you have this half moon side to show that you're cutting 1/2-inch numbers like 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, so forth. So since we're cutting 4-inch half square triangles, you're going to line this diagonal line up. Make sure you're within the 4-inch area. You're going to trim the side and the top. And then turn the other way. This time you're going to line up the 4-inch square. And there you go. And you're going to go ahead and trim all of these up to 4 inches. So I'm going to show one more. So line up that diagonal line right at your seam. All right, so after you get these cut, you're going to sew them together so that the printed half side of the half square triangle comes together to kind of make flying geese look. You could either do it where you make sure all of your patterns stay together, or you could mix them up if you want to. It just depends on what look you are going for. I'm going to keep my designs together, so I'm going to sew all of mine to make kind of a flying geese. So you're making that triangle larger. So I'm going to fold them right sides together. You can put a pin in here if you would like. And I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam. All right, so now that we have that seam sewn, you have a few options here. You can press them to one side, or you can press them open. I'm going to press them open just to relieve some of the bulk here, because that is a lot of fabric coming together, but it is completely up to you as to what you do. All right, so there is my seam pressed open. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's get all of our half square triangles made. Let's get them all pressed and trimmed and all sewn to make kind of this flying geese shape. Now that you are done sewing all of your blocks together, all of your blocks that are kind of a faux flying geese, and have all of your other blocks cut, you can start trying some different layouts. So I'm going to share 4 layouts that I put together for examples. However, you can lay your blocks out in so many different ways using just these 2 different blocks. Now, what I want you to think about when you are deciding on your layout is that I kind of followed the idea that there are only 12 blocks across the top and 16 coming down to make it a little bit easier. Since this is technically 2 pieces sewn together, I'm counting it as 2, which means I'm also counting the rectangle that is 1 piece as 2. It'll just make it a little bit easier for layouts if you think of it that way, because sometimes you might have all of your blocks in a row like this, but you might have some thrown in that are going in different directions. So if you just think of each of these as 2 blocks, it'll make it a lot easier for the layout to make sure you're getting everything to work, especially if you're wanting to follow one of my layouts that I'm showing. Something else I want to point out is if you are having some of your blocks going in different directions like this, you may want to sew like these 2 together with a 1/4 inch seam and press it open. And then if you have 2 of these stacked this way, sew them together and press the seams and then sew the row together if you're having a lot going in different directions. So just to be aware of your layout for sewing later on. Try a bunch of different layouts and just see what works for you. And I'll share which one I decided on as well. So here at this step, when I'm sewing rows together, is when I like to break out those needles that are doubles, because it helps me line up my points a little better for rows especially. So here I have a seam that can meet, and you see that they're nested going in opposite directions. So I put the needle, or I put the pin in so that it will hold down the seams that are pressed to the right and the seams that'll press to the left. So if I want this one to meet as well nicely, I can put a pin in here, and I just go through and use these wherever it makes sense to be able to get those seams to meet nicely. So you can see here I don't have any that will really meet, but I do have one in the middle that I would like for it to meet up nicely. And this will also help you keep your rows the proper length so that they all end exactly where they start and end exactly where they should if you put these pins in meeting the seams. So I have one here. And then the rest of them, they don't really have any that line up. So I'm going to use just my regular pins and put a few more in so that make sure everything aligns nicely. So one thing you can notice is this is my row 1, and all my seams are pressed to the left. So you see how they're all pressed to the left? And then on my row 2, they're all pressed to the right, aside from the ones that I pressed open. So for my odd rows, I pressed all of them to the left, and my even rows, like row 2, I pressed all of them to the right, and that is what helps me nest my seams, because since they're pressed in opposite directions, I can bring them together nicely and put a pin so that all of my rows stay evenly lined up. So I'm going to go through with all my rows and do the same thing, pin them at wherever I can meet seams. Then I will press all the seams down and get this top piece together quickly. So I'll show you the top after it's all sewn. All right, so here is my quilt top so far, and I could stop here with the way it looks as is. It is a really cute quilt top. I especially love it with this fabric line. It is just beautiful and it goes so well together. I am so happy with how it turned out. Now, the top finished as is about 42.5 by 56 inches. Now, I am going to add on thin border strips. These are 1.5 inches. And then I'm going to use those extra charm pack squares that I had and cut them in half. And I am going to add a border on with these as well. Let me just show you what my plan is. So I'm going to add the thin border strip along each side, all 4 sides. And then I'm just going to sew these rectangles that I cut from the charm packs around the sides. So I'm going to need about 10 across the top and 13 across the sides. So I think I will need a little bit more on the edges. So I'm going to cut a little bit extra and then I'll give you those final measurements. Yeah, I think it's going to look great having that little extra border. I'm hoping that I can find one of these plaids through here to get for the binding on the end. I think that will look really nice. I'm going to show you what it looks like after I have the thin border on and charm pack that I cut in half border. All right, so here is my finished quilt, and I think the border really adds a nice touch. So if you did decide to use charm packs to complete this quilt, you can easily add on this border with the extra charms from your charm pack. I am so happy with how this quilt turned out. Let me know in the comments if you plan to make one, if you decide to do this layout or another one. You can always reach out to me on Facebook in my Facebook group. It's So Be It Quilts, and share photos there of your quilt makes. I would love to see them. All right, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.